So we're going to go into a bit more detail about the body. Now this isn't a skeleton video just yet, that's the next one. We're going to break down those forms of the body into a bit more kind of calculated, measured kind of forms. So we've got Laura for this. Hello Laura, and she's got it stood here. And all we're going to look at here are the different angles of the body. So we've already looked at the muscular zones of the body. Now what we're going to look at is if we break that body even further down into basic shapes, into basic blocks. So I'm really interested on how people take this measuring kind of mentality into the body, because there still is just as much measuring in the body. So here at first what we're going to look at is just how to break down the torso into simple blocks, and boom, that's what we've got here. So simple blocks. Now the biggest one I would really want people to think about is, yes, our head is facing forward all the time, but inside the torso it's the angle of the pelvis and the actual rib cage itself, because they're not just facing flat, they're facing outwards. So if you remember, or if you think about like a little crease in the back of the spine where the bum is, and it opens up the abdominals, or your chest is facing upwards and your pelvis is facing downwards, you're always going to have that natural curve to the human body. What I don't want to see is people sculpting bodies which are incredibly flat and straight, especially in the back, because your spine doesn't do that. Again, when we look at the skeleton, we're going to see the spine is actually a very incredibly curvy thing. So I really want people to remember that curve. Now also on the flip side of that, you don't want to over curve it. You don't want to give someone like some really bad back issues. So thinking about these different angles, obviously our box of the head is facing forward, our rib cage is then tilted upwards. There's no real in degrees, it's just all about, you know, observation of the person, trying to look through all the soft detail and trying to put like a basic form over that to try and find the angle of the body and the angle of the pelvis. But they'll always be facing, the pelvis will always facing down and the chest will always be facing upwards. You'll always get this shape in the actual body. Then on top of that, I want us to start thinking about measurements. So in the head we're measuring the halves and the thirds and stuff. In the body, in the torso, I want us to start thinking about units and stuff. So I've got head units, HU. This is just like a rough shorthand that I found in books which explain the width of stuff. We're going to go into how to break down the body into width a number of different ways, like in its measurements. We're going to look at a few different ways of measuring the body, because there's loads of different ways, and maybe one will work for you, maybe one won't. But roughly, obviously we've got our head is one head unit from the side. Roughly, from the front, the head is 0.7 units wide. 0.7 of the standard 1 unit head. Now on Laura, I think she actually breaks that. I think she's much more in like the 0.6, but I'm just using that as a shorthand. So from the side of the head, that's one head unit, let's call that. The front of the head is about 0.7 of that head unit wide. The torso, so from the front, is about 1.2, 1.3, depending on your chest size, units wide. So you're basically adding 0.4 on, 0.1 either side. It's, you get what I mean. It's a little bit wider than the head. And lengthwise, it's about 1.5 size the head, so 1.5 head units. So your chest is obviously longer than your head, but not by that much, only by about half. And the depth is one head unit as well. Oh, sorry, yeah, I've already said that. So yeah, the width 1.2, the depth 1.5, and the actual, the height 1.5. The depth is 1 unit, roughly. Obviously, depending on your subject. And then the pelvis, very, very similar. What we've got is about the same width as your rib cage, and we're talking about the widest part of the rib cage as well here, because obviously the rib cage isn't a box. It's a kind of a teardrop shape with a pizza cup taken out of it. But the widest part of your rib cage is about 1.2. The widest part of your pelvis is about 1.2. The depth of your pelvis is, now this differs. The width and the depth of your pelvis differs wildly depending on male, female, broad, thin, slight, thick, all that kind of jazz. But in this case, Laura is about 1.2. And the depth is about 7. So we've not got drastically wild numbers, but if from the profile that's your head unit, from the front, it's a little bit thinner, obviously. Your chest is wider than your head, obviously longer than your head, but it's about as deep. Because you could comfortably fit your head in your rib cage facing forward, which is a horrific sight. And then width of your pelvis, again, Laura's about 1.2 here, same width as the chest. Does differ on the subject. So Anthony, for instance, He's very thin in his waist. Jon is thinner than his rib cage, but not that thin. Saki is about the same. And then your obviously pelvis is shallower. Now that is not necessarily, this will throw some people off. When you come up to your bum muscles or your abdominal muscles, that might add a bit more depth to your appear to add a bit more depth to your pelvis. But really all that's adding is you've just got extra fat at the front and extra fat at the back. Well, Laura, she's not got a whole lot of fat, so she's not really got a bum and she's not really got abdominals. Obviously she does, but they're very, very flat and thin. But then when you're dealing with people who are thicker, fuller body, petite, or just fatter in general, or far more musclier, that's when you start adding that depth. But your pelvis doesn't really change. You're still going to have that tilt to your pelvis. You're still going to have that depth to your pelvis. It's just all about what happens on top. Okay, so really, really think about the head units. Now, this could be a way for some people to get, measuring the head, stuff like that. Now, happening underneath this are curves. I really want people to really think about these curves that are happening. Again, one thing I really don't want people to do is to have bodies which are just straight lines like that, from the back of the head to the neck to the back to the bum, just being a straight line, because that's what's happening. If we over exaggerate it, obviously Laura's arms in the way there, but really what we've got going on is constant sweeps like this. The whole body's like a rhythm. You might have heard the term rhythmic drawing, or rhythmic structure, and this is basically what it is. It's getting away from these very, very sharp, boxed kind of ways of breaking down the body, and it's more about a gestural. So you see a lot in life drawing, where the people, there we go, will break down the body into gestures and lines. So you got these sweeps and angles, so you've really got to think about the way the whole body kind of bends and forms. It's very, very obvious from the side, but it's just as obvious from the front. You've got these sweeps that follow through. Now again, Laura, she's very, very thin, so we don't get a lot of that kind of more petite figured or fuller figured kind of flow, but we do still have those angles. And that's one thing that when we come into sculpting the human body, is we don't want to be too rigid. Obviously, we want to have nice definition. If we're doing someone who's got nice definition, we still do want to define, but we don't want anything to like rigid and stiff. We want to make it look loose and natural and flowing, almost like a person who's stood in front of us who's relaxed, and their the shoulders are relaxed. The shoulders aren't too stressed. So you've got to think about that flowing. If you've ever seen me draw or see people who are very, very lucid drawing, you will see that we are quite, loose. And for instance, I like legs. I like drawing legs for some reason. Don't know why. But when I'm drawing a leg very fast, you might have seen me do it where I'm drawing with the rhythm. And we can do the exact same thing with the body. We draw with the body. There you go, so that's my profile from the side right there. So obviously this is my pelvis right here, this is my rib cage here. So a combination of thinking about the boxes of the body, so these boxes which define the shape, as well as these rhythmic flows, because obviously I've just used the boxes there to denote which direction a basic form is facing, but obviously the rib cage isn't a box. So you've got to remember those angles traveling through the body. So all in all, that's kind of what we're looking for. You've got this rib cage, which is this like upside down teardrop shape with a bit cut off, that kind of faces upwards, especially if you kind of like stand straight and puff your chest out. Your chest is technically facing upwards. If you think about the solar plexus, the chest, your pectorals as a flat plane, that's going to be facing upwards. It kind of faces a bit straighter when you slump, but generally when you stand up straight, it faces upwards. And your pelvis faces downwards, technically. It's just the way that the body kind of is formed. Your pelvis, the open part of your pelvis faces downwards. And And obviously the top of your pelvis, that's going to give you the width of your hips, and then when you go down, that's obviously going to give the width of the top of the thigh, because that's where you've got your ball and socket joints for your legs, for your femur. And then obviously remembering that flow over the body, that flow. So when we come into sculpting, I really want people to think about this. This is also down to this is commonly attributed to an artist. Oh, I've lost my thing. There you go. Commonly attributed to an artist called George Bridgman. George Bridgman, man, there you go. George Bridgman, who wrote this series of books that was breaking down the body into blocks and machine. I think one of them is called the machinery of the body or something, and he breaks down all the different limbs and bits of the body into mechanical devices. Essentially, it's so good. It's a very, 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 very old book, so a lot of the drawings are sometimes a bit hard to make out because they were copied from a very old-fashioned way of drawing on paper, which is very toothy. Everyone's white, which is crap. Everyone's just got everything's attributed to the westernized European body, and everything's a 6-foot dude essentially. There's a little bit of female shape in there, but generally everything's is a 6-foot dude. But aside from that, he actually had some really fascinating ways of breaking down the human body, breaking down you'll see a lot of people drawing these Bridgman style bodies. I would say that the Asaro head is a corruption of the Bridgman approach to stuff, because it's all like the block planes and stuff. So if you ever get a chance, look up these Bridgman books. I really, really rate them. I believe we might have 1 or 2 in the library, but they're also on eBay eBay? On Amazon for pretty good prices. I did have them, but mine have disappeared into the ether years ago. But Bridgman was a great guy to look up. And it's different from the Lumith method as well. Where the Lumith method obviously is good, but it heavily relates to drawing. The Bridgman book really, really is useful for sculptors as well. But ending on, that's really what I want us to think about. If we got our subject, we've got Laura here. Try and break down the body into these different blocks for the pelvis, the head, and the chest. If you use your head as a measuring device, then you can get a good idea about how wide stuff is. And then think about those angles, think about those rhythms. So this is much more when we're sculpting. Stay away from being very, very loose. So you want to find that nice in-between line of nice solid modeling with some good structure, but then not too stiff that they look like they're tensing themselves. You want to remember the curves, the sweeps. There's no real hard angles in a human body. Everything is, even though if they're very, very well defined, still very soft. And then you got that substructure as well. So just like with the head, the skeleton plays a massive, massive role in what the shape of the body is. The widest part of anything is going to be the widest part of the skeleton. The widest part of the rib cage is the widest part of your widest part of your chest is the widest part of your rib cage. The widest part of your hips is because of the widest part of your pelvis. The widest part of your shoulders is because the widest part of both your clavicle, scapula, and arm. The widest part of your head because it's called the widest part. All this, it's all down to the skeleton. We can never get away from skeleton. So please remember that. So we'll be doing a deeper dive into the skeleton in the next video. But then again, just back this up with the video on the regions of the body, and it's going to be super, super good for you.